The creativity point is interesting. Like Adrian, I was just thinking, like, Irish sport, we're not really the most creative nation when it comes to sport, rugby, football, throw any sport you want at me. We are more of a roll up your sleeves. We are about hard work, honesty of effort over creativity. And who knows why? I mean, there could be any number of plausible theories, from the weather to being an island on the edge of Europe where ideas didn't exactly flourish pre-internet, to hell, the Catholic Church. Maybe it's, that oppressive air. That's why you go and stand in your spot in GAA and don't move from your position until about 20 years ago. Whatever the reason, we are where we are, but we're just, we of course, exceptions. And a Robbie Keane pops up and it's just a goal getter. But we tend to be about working very, very hard for our rewards as a sporting nation.
I do disagree with that, Joe. I have to say, there's a whole bunch of examples that come to mind where you think about Kerry football or Galway football. You look at, would you say the current Dublin football team are creative? I think they could fit into that category quite neatly. But a question back to you: who would you say are the most creative sporting team in Ireland at the minute?
The most creative sporting team in Ireland at the minute. And by the way, on your Kerry point and your Galway point, I accept that. Like, it breaks out, of course. But I'd love to see what the Dutch and the French would do with Gaelic football. Gaelic football is a roll up your sleeves kind of a vibe in too many areas. And who are the most creative team in Irish sport?
I'm obviously leading you along here, Joe. Leinster rugby, for me, and have been over the last number of years, they play an unbelievably exciting, expansive, creative, brilliant brand of rugby. So if they can do it, I don't understand. That's why I would disagree with the point about the creativity, or about the having the raw ingredients specifically, because I think they're all there. And would I draw a line straight back to Andy Farrell necessarily either? I'm not sure about that. I would agree with Richie's point about it's a bit early. But at the same time, I think it's fair enough to say that is the coaching ticket getting the most out of this bunch of players at the minute. I think the answer to that is no.
The Leinster one's interesting. I'm not sure they're as creative as they were, actually. But let's not go down that rabbit hole. Let's stick to Ireland.
The most obvious example of Leinster's creativity and elan and all that good stuff would be James Lowe. And again, James Lowe is somebody who was brought through, was our last really, project player from overseas. And like you're saying there, Joe, that you haven't seen the progress that necessarily we're hearing that there has been in the Ireland squad. I haven't really seen it from James Lowe yet on the international stage. And again, maybe it's something that I'm missing, but I thought yesterday in particular was another fairly average game from him, and what we were sold in terms of what he would bring to the team, I haven't seen at all.
Seem to be a few defensive issues. And like Adrian, I'm definitely exaggerating, to be fair, to make the point. And of course, there are creative spurts here and there, but compared to the French yesterday, and we're just not in that ballpark. What they're doing is beautiful. Our rugby ain't beautiful.
No, it's not. And look, there isn't any point in saying that what we're doing at the minute is beautiful or that creative from an Irish point of view. It's definitely not. I would have to say that I look at cards on the table. I felt and feel that starting, it all looks lovely in hindsight, but starting Billy Burns at 10, I think, was a mistake. I think he's a 26-year-old who, if we haven't seen it from him at this stage, I don't know, he hasn't been exposed to a huge amount of international rugby. Has he been setting the world alight so much for Ulster that we had to bust a gut to get him in the team? Did he do so much in the weekend previously to insist that he must start? Make no mistake about it, if Andy Farrell is putting him in at 10 against the French in the Six Nations, he believes that this guy is the future. And that's massively concerning for me when you look at the spread of other out-halves that are there. And one last point on that, Joe. This was the perfect opportunity for the IRFU, David Nusafora, in consultation clearly and a partnership with Andy Farrell, to have given it a lash with some of the younger players. We're not talking about a year where you had to put bums on seats in the Aviva or whatever else it might be. You've got a captive audience at home that are going to look at this no matter what. There was huge excitement about the Irish bench, for example, on Sunday. So you couldn't suggest that people wouldn't have been excited by the opportunity of obviously there's a bit of a clamour at the minute for Harry Byrne. You could make an equal case, I think, for Ben Healy, almost the exact same age, two players of monster prospects. Jack Hartigo, Mila Connacht, not to mention Ross Byrne, who came on and like he's seen, and it's almost like a bit of a backwards compliment that he's such a solid player and a steady pair of hands. But we saw what he could bring when he came in on Sunday. For me, I think that it's a real missed opportunity that the people who were running Irish rugby couldn't have said, do you know what, it's a transitional time for us, and let's get a bunch of young players in there. I think it's a real missed opportunity.
Yeah, Liam Toll and Keith Wood on the way. I think they're both advocating Harry Byrne starts against Italy, and we'll tease that out after 8 o'clock. Jerry says, you blame the Catholic Church for the Irish rugby team? What rubbish. Connacht, by the way, are by far the most creative rugby team. Well, Jerry, I think there's no doubt the Catholic Church has had a massive impact on the culture in the country. It's not the only reason. I threw out several reasons without knowing the exact answer. But I mean, are we? I think there's something
Similar
in it.
I remember when the O'Donovans came to prominence in 2016, and before they won their Olympic medal, and then subsequently afterwards. And it's something that, it was a study I think that Kieran Cunningham quoted at me a couple of times when I was over in Rio. It's that in terms of sports and the sports that Irish people are good at from a purely genetic standpoint, ones that involve suffering are what we usually specialize in, and what our genetic makeup, if you want to call it that, is probably better disposed to. Ones that involve endurance, that involve a kind of solo activity, whether it's just rowing or whether it's just, kicking, whatever. If it's just the one thing and we just add it, boxing, exactly, then we're pretty good at it. If it involves a bit of skill, a bit of free thinking, and a bit of je ne sais quoi, if you want to throw in the French there from yesterday, it's just not natural to the Irish people.
Not in the culture. I mean, think about GAA for a second. Think how little GAA moved on for the guts of 20, 30 years in the latter half of the 20th century. That was odd when you think about it. The lack of positional experimentation, and then whoom, maybe it's the internet. I mean, I've thrown all this out far too early. I need to think it all through. But suddenly ideas are more easily swapped. You can watch footage of different sports in different ways and thinking, there were no basketball coaches, to the best of my knowledge, involved in GAA 30 years ago. So, I think there is something there. Somebody makes the point that we're creative when it comes to the arts, even food at times, music, and we're occasionally creative on the sporting field, which, by the way, of course we are. We are, of course, creative occasionally on the sporting field. I'm talking in a broad, general way here, a la France and rugby versus Ireland rugby. But the texture continues. But usually it's down to, on the sporting field, he says, a generational individual talent rather than collective brilliance. Bod or TJ Reid come to mind. That's Ross. Interesting concept, Joe, says Hugh in Cork. Basketball, though, in Ireland during its zenith in the mid-80s, there were very creative Irish athletes, notwithstanding the American pros, who obviously influenced so much. Yeah, that's a fair point to you. I mean, I didn't see much basketball in Ireland in the 80s, to be fair, but I do take your word for it. Who knows, though? Maybe the American pros shaped the thinking, but I take the point. I'm not sure where this reputation that Leinster are creative at rugby comes from, says a texter. They beat teams up increasingly. They are methodical, but Toulouse, they are not. And there's various texts coming in. Dublin side 2014, probably the most expansive side Ireland has produced. And Donegal proved why that causes issues too, says Michael in Santry. I'll let the text come in and the verdict will become very clear, I'm sure, if I'm talking out of my backside, Adrian. One last question before we get to the news round. So, Murrayfield followed by England and Dublin. That ain't easy. There are no guarantees there. I mean, it's a terrible thought to imagine 0 for 4 in these games. How much pressure is Andy Farrell under at the moment, do you think? He's got to win one of them, you would think, to just keep the wolves from the door and stop this thing becoming a big circus and a feeding frenzy.
I think he'll be under unbelievable. He'll be under serious heat, but he won't get the boot. Essentially, if they lose to both of those teams, they'll view it as a lot of players out, etc., etc. And that, again, look at all the more reason to have sampled a bit. The Joe, on the Irish culture thing, that's let's definitely come back to that at some point. But it does, I think, we're a wild shower of whatever you want to insert here yourself, right? Like, we live on an island, the last ditch island before you sort of head out into vast expanses of the ocean going back over the years. There's a wildness to us that I think doesn't lend itself to structure that well. I think that might be a part of the team aspect of things. And I think it's unfair to say that, you point out somebody like a Brian O'Driscoll or a DJ Carey and Maurice Fitzgerald, flip Sonia O'Sullivan, go through the list. Katie Taylor and say, oh, well, they're the exceptions. But like, they're also a product of the system. I think my theory now, I've thought about this in the last 5 minutes, is that we're just wild. We are just beyond wild.
Well,
and like, it's brand new to us to be thinking and talking about like the sort of, those New Zealand type systems of that kind of structure. I think is just totally alien to us now. Like maybe in 100 years time when we're all shuffled off the coil, that that's our culture at that time. But I think at the minute we're centuries of wildness, Joe.
if we're so wild, why is our rugby the most structured bloody rugby in the world at the moment?
Well, maybe it shouldn't be. Is that not the point? Maybe this is just it's not something that comes naturally to Irish people now. You'd have to accept that there are people on the text already getting ready to punch in the fact that we're full of New Zealanders and New Zealanders and South Africans and whatever else you're having yourself, Englishmen. But yeah, maybe we don't. Maybe if we played more to our strengths, like the wildness of Kerry football or the wildness of Galway football, Joe, maybe that's what we need to come back to.
Yeah, well, the cultured Kerry football, I'd more say so than wild, creative skills. But I don't know. It was just a thought I'm throwing out there. It was just hard not to watch France and think, God, that freedom of expression, built up over decades, and why are we just almost inhibited at times?
But I Joe, I wouldn't. Sorry for cutting across. I wouldn't like. What we were looking at the weekend and like specifically looking at the end of the game where not to mind lateral, we were going backwards. I don't think it's fair to judge where this rugby team are at based on that, given the players that were out. I mean, when you consider, draw them up on a list there, like, I don't know. Maybe you would argue that whoever comes in should be playing the same sort of expansive style, but it's like you're taking a step down in terms of the quality to execute an expansive game plan. If that's what he has in mind, maybe he doesn't, but difficult given all those players that are out.
No, of course, it's difficult, to be fair. I would say two things. Most teams are missing big players all the time. It's the nature of rugby. Injuries are just a part of it. And maybe more to the point, all the things we're sort of saying, I feel like we were saying exactly the same things after the defeat to Japan in the World Cup. And we were talking about their expansive play and their offloading and putting pace into the game. I feel like coming up on 3 years on, we're having the same conversation about Ireland being bottom, and we are, by the way, bottom of the offloading charts in the Six Nations. That's where 19 through to 20 and now into 21 has got us. That's that feels like, man, are we trying to move the game plan on? Like, what's Mike Catt's vision? Again, nobody's calling for heads, far from it, and they could easily win the next 3 games. But stylistically, you're kind of thinking, is it not, Adrian, very similar conversation to what we would have had in the days and weeks after the defeat to Japan in the World Cup?
Couldn't disagree with that at all, Joe. The progress. Where is the progress? I think is an utterly reasonable question to ask.
Yeah.
I think if I'm Andy Farrell sitting down with the IRFU right now, I'm like, listen, I can't do what I want to do because at the minute, and look at, like you say, fair enough, not to mind rugby, most teams generally, look at Liverpool at the minute, are coping without players that you would like to have in there.
Yeah.
So it's difficult, but I am saying, listen, get me James Ryan back, get me Baird up to speed in a year's time, get me a new, it's not Billy Burns in my book, but get the new, whoever's going to be post-Sexton in. You might be looking at Craig Casey, like, give me time and I can do something else for you. I don't know. It's like, that's not going to win you any Six Nations anytime soon, but
yeah, but it's fair. It's a fair point to make as well. Like, you can't just bang the table here and demand everything now. Like, there are a lot of mitigating circumstances right now. We should press on with the news round on Off the Ball and News Talk. It is, as ever, with thanks to Gillette. We don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters. Richie, live football this evening.
Yeah, 2 London sides with designs on the Premier League's top 4 tonight. The first that can crack that glass ceiling and look like doing so, in fact, is West Ham. They're well into the second half there at the London Stadium, midway through, and it's West Ham 2, Sheffield United 0. Declan Rice with a penalty 4 minutes before the break for the hosts. Their advantage doubled by Issa Diop in the last few moments. At 8 o'clock, Chelsea welcome Newcastle to Stamford Bridge. Looking back again at yesterday, Andy Farrell says the remainder of Ireland's Six Nations campaign will be a test of the squad's character. Talk of winning the championship left for the coast yesterday with the 15-13 defeat to France at the Aviva, and Ireland's next outing comes away to Italy in just under a fortnight's time. Jacob Stockdale unlikely to be involved in that one, with Ulster saying today he remains sidelined with a knee injury. Former Ireland back row Alan Quinlan joined the lads on this morning's OTBAM, saying among the Irish shortcomings yesterday was lack of speed in the tackle.
we were very passive off the line. Ross Byrne, Robbie Henshaw, Gary Ringrose, really, really passive. I thought our aggression and that line speed should have been a lot quicker, and we invited them on a little bit, and we were sitting back on our heels a little bit, waiting for some of those tackles. And look, the desire to make the tackles is there, but I just think we can be more aggressive and quicker off the line, and have more. It's not desire, but just more energy in sprinting across the line. And maybe it's something in the legs. It was in the second half. I think we were better in the first half at it, but it's maybe it's gone out of the legs from the effort level put in the first half. My big worry in the first half was that how taxing it is in Ireland. It's at times nearly all the time it's harder defending, and it takes more out of your legs. But the effort that Ireland put in and the energy, and I thought it was they were brilliant in that first half. Just didn't register on the scoreboard. But going back to the defence, the 4 tries we conceded were preventable.
Yeah, that tallies with your point, Rich. I agree with it as well. I thought it was the same in Paris, that Ireland have to put so much into the game. As soon as they tire 10%, France expose it, and it seemed to be the case yesterday. Right, I just want to apologise up front for my half-baked theory, which only kind of came to me during news headlines about Ireland and creativity. But there are a lot of texts in. I'll rip through them very quickly. Wexford Hurling 2019, beautiful to watch, says Paddy in Waterford. Limerick, a creative team with their own unique style of play over the last 2 years, says John. Kieran and Nace, rugby offloading, not taught at underage and not a culture of it in the schools and all the way through to senior levels. So not a huge creative culture from underage in the sport in this country, says Kieran in Nace. Owen says the suffering theory makes more sense. That's why the Golf Weekly lads love speed so much. Could be true. Gents, I'm 63. I played rugby a long time ago. My school trainer hated what he called grunt rugby. Yesterday, we had grunt rugby. That's John in Limerick. Lads, let's face it, if we didn't have GAA in the country, we'd be much better professional, or we'd have much better professional international sides. It's a talent drain that nobody else has to cope with. And then a last 2. Across all sports, we are technically poor. There's something sorry, I'm not going to stick my tuppence in. I don't totally disagree with that. Obviously, there's going to be exceptions, but I'll continue the text. Across all sports, we are technically poor. That is the result of playing too many games in a whole range of sports and not enough time training or developing skills. What we create is a fighter with great spirit, great heart, who'll never give up, but who is technically poor. And then, lads, for the amount of different sports that are played in this country and the size of the population, it's nigh on impossible to produce great teams on a consistent level. Good teams will come and go, but not on a conveyor belt, says Niall in Tala. And then Brian makes the fair point. France are terribly unadventurous hurlers, which is also true. Adrian, I'll let that all stew around your brain for a second, but Richie, you can tell us about Daily Mount.
Yeah, the proposed redevelopment of the home of Irish football has moved a significant step closer today. The Department of Finance approving a drawdown of over €900,000 that will be used to enable detailed design work to take place. Dalymount's regeneration is estimated to cost a total of €34.3 million in conjunction with the redevelopment of Phibsborough Shopping Centre. Back to the rugby, and Dan Leavy season is over. Leinster confirmed today that the flanker underwent a procedure to repair cartilage in his knee. Leavy only returned to action in late October, playing 9 games after 19 months out with another knee injury, although it is believed the latest procedure is an elective one and he should be back running by May or June. And Kilkenny's Denise Goal and Grace Walsh have been nominated for the Camogie Senior Player of the Year award alongside Galway's Shauna Healy. Kilkenny crowned All-Ireland champions in December with a 3-point win over Galway in that final. The Intermediate Player of the Year shortlist is comprised of Antrim's Maeve Kelly and Downpair Niamh Mallon and Sarah Louise Crallaffin. Armagh's Ciara Donnelly and Leanne Donnelly are in the running for the Junior Player of the Year alongside Cavan's Roisin O'Keefe. The Camogie All-Star teams will be announced at a virtual event on Saturday the 6th of March.
Adrian, beside French hurling, any of those texts catch your ear?
Technically, that's a word that I don't want to say now. That's a lot of nonsense. That word technically somehow not predisposed. What a load of nonsense. Like, no, I'm not having that. And like,
would you not say, for instance, so the technical point is about how we're coaching our kids, and the texter was saying we don't focus enough on developing the skills. Would you not think, looking at, for instance, to you, because we're bagging rugby here, would you not think looking at the Irish football team that technically at an international level, we have been behind the curve. Every Eastern European team we play is technically better than us. We've lots of attributes, but I don't know. I think there's something in that.
I would say at times that with the Irish football team that we haven't played to the strengths of technical players. So at times maybe we didn't get to see how technically they were because we didn't want to hang on to the ball too long, hoof it forward, chase it up. And then at times when we went to play a technical game, yeah, maybe some players were exposed. I think that's fair enough. But I think there's a deeper conversation about that in terms of the quality of Irish football now versus where it was at years ago. How we're training anyway, forgetting about all that, I took the texter to mean that we were somehow predisposed against being that technical.
No.
For the reason that I thought he was sort of saying, or he or she was saying that we're playing too many sports, whereas, and up to a point, obviously, that's actually what they say is the best possible thing for a kid to do, up to a point.
No, I think the point was almost we get straight into matches and we try and win the matches, and so we create warriors, and as opposed to perfecting, the skills that a DuPont has, or many brilliant footballers have technically. Yeah. Wes Hoolahan, we don't produce enough Wes Hoolahans would be the point.
To broaden the point, what is the one thing that GAA players have campaigned for most over the last couple of years? Less training, more matches. The point doesn't stand up.
I think at underage more so. I mean, when you're an adult, you want to play matches, in fairness.
Yeah, I don't know. To be honest, I don't know, Joe, at underage. I don't know the quality of. I couldn't say what sort of quality they're doing in terms of knocking technical proficiency into players underage.
I think we're getting better on the football front, by the way. And actually, as I speak, Michael, an underage coach in Kerry, Joe, just on the football front, every game from under 6 up to 12 now has to start play with the goalkeeper passing the ball out of defence. It's a long road, but we will improve on that front eventually. See, I think so too. I think we're going in the right direction. I was more, my point was actually more about, casting a look back over, the last 50, 60 years or whatever. Not that I can comment, having watched all the matches 50 years ago, but it was where we've come from kind of a point.
And look, I don't know, that's a very football specific point. Like, I just broadened the point to look as a country, as an island, look, start drawing a list there of like world beaters of across different sports that we've had. You'll have a list as long as your arm in no time.
Yeah, I'm sure I will. That was the problem with throwing out a half-baked theory. So I'd like to revoke it now and pretend it never happened as we wrap up the news round, as is my want. Adrian, Barry, thanks very much.
Thanks, Joe.
Richie, pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers, lads.
We're going to talk to Mark Lawrenson next, and we'll hear from Jurgen Klopp as well.